Millions of people are shouting for revolution. Cities are falling, civil war is breaking out, and the regime is losing control. Not only internally, but also beyond its borders. The first spark that ended the regime's global legitimacy occurred 5,000 kilometers away, in the heart of London. It all began in front of the Iranian embassy building in Knightsbridge. The Iranian regime's flags were removed from the building. They were replaced with the lion and sun flag. That moment on the balcony was not just a flag change, it was the symbolic execution of an era that had lasted since 1979. This turning point was triggered by the Crown Prince in exile pressing the button.
All Iranian embassies and consulates outside Iran belong to the Iranian people, and the time has come for these buildings to be adorned with Iran's national flag, instead of the Islamic Republic's shameful flag.
When the Shah issued this order to his supporters, London was the first to comply. The irony was here. There is a common saying among the Iranian people: if you lift a mullah's beard, you will find "Made in UK" written underneath. While this may seem like an exaggerated urban legend, the diplomatic reality is different. Even after the 1979 revolution, the UK never completely severed its intelligence and backdoor diplomacy with Iran. London was a safe haven where the regime's elite sent their children to school, safely stored their money, and traded on the stock market. However, what we saw that night with the consulate raid was that this haven was closed forever. Because that day, the protesters didn't just change the flag, they shattered the windows of the Iranian consulate. Police deployed additional forces to the scene, but the damage created a symbolic breaking point. When the lion and sun flag, representing thousands of years of Persian history and the Shah era, was raised, the crowd in the streets of London erupted in celebration. More than 30,000 British citizens filled central London to show solidarity with the Iranian protesters. This is not a simple protest. We are witnessing the global declaration that the UK has pulled the plug on the regime in Tehran. The bridge is broken. Under normal circumstances, a diplomatic mission on UK soil is protected by the Metropolitan Police's most elite units. According to the Vienna Convention, those buildings are inviolable, and the host country is obligated to take all necessary measures to protect them. However, on that day, an invisible hand pulled the switch in London. In the United Kingdom, which has been the bastion of diplomatic immunity and protocol for centuries, the police withdrew that night, and the consulate fell. The images from the scene confirm not a security lapse, but a deliberate withdrawal strategy. Now let's zoom out a bit and focus on the bigger picture, the geopolitical and historical dimensions of this issue. Why is the UK's stance so critical for the Iranian regime? Historically, the relationship between the UK and Iran has always been deep and enigmatic. As we mentioned earlier, if you lift the mullah's beard, you'll find "Made in UK" underneath. However, the British may now be starting to see the regime in Tehran not as a manageable partner or a necessary evil, but as toxic waste that must be disposed of. This situation is very different from the MI6 operation that overthrew Mossadegh in 1953 or the Shah's departure in 1979. Back then, the UK was the game changer. Now, it is the executioner. Allowing the Shah's flag to be flown at the British consulate is London's message to Tehran. We are done with you. Our new interlocutor is Pahlavi. The bridge wasn't just broken, it was blown up. Immediately after the UK physically closed the door, the diplomatic coup de grace came from Germany. Germany's foreign ministry said the Iranian regime's legitimacy is over. And now, the dominoes are falling from Berlin to Baku. Germany, Europe's political engine, made a historic statement through its foreign ministry. The Germans were clear about the upcoming meeting with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The Tehran regime has lost its legitimacy.
We are witnessing the last days and weeks of this regime.
This statement is essentially a death sentence for a regime under international law. The loss of legitimacy paves the way for the suspension of agreements with that state, the withdrawal of ambassadors, and most importantly, the recognition of the opposition as the representative of the Iranian people. Germany and the UK have chosen not to recognize the Iranian regime diplomatically. For the first time, the Western Bloc has pressed the regime change button in such a synchronized manner. This controlled explosion was a signal flare, and its impact instantly crossed the English Channel. Protests against Kahemeni's wall of fear spread not only in the UK, but across all European capitals. The first spark jumped to Italy. In Milan's famous squares, massive electronic billboards were hacked or bought. It was no longer Kahemeni's propaganda, but the silhouette of the lion and the sun that illuminated the city. This was a digital uprising, demonstrating the erosion of the regime's visual dominance at the heart of Europe. The wave did not stop. Germany, Sweden, France, and even Canada, they all took to the streets at the same time. From Stockholm to Toronto, the Iranian diaspora began to move in an organized manner, like Reza Pahlavi's Foreign Legion, rather than a scattered group of refugees. As thousands marched against the regime in Germany, the message was unified and chilling. We are coming. This was a nation living in exile for 47 years, preparing to return to their homeland. Even on the other side of the world, in Australia, "Long live the Shah" slogans echoed across the sky. This was a global coordination, not a random outburst of anger. The diaspora organized to pressure the governments of their host countries to expel Iranian regime ambassadors. These diplomatic isolation decisions from London and Berlin represent not only a loss of prestige for decision-makers in Tehran, but also a surgical severing of the regime's financial and logistical lifelines. The European-based network of front companies, used for years to circumvent Western sanctions, launder money, and finance covert operations, has been left defenseless with the removal of the diplomatic protective shield. The billions of dollars in assets held in European banks or real estate, seen as the regime's Plan B and for a rainy day, are now no longer a guarantee, but could become evidence of crime awaiting seizure. This situation may have triggered panic among the Iranian regime's elite that our homes and accounts in London will be seized. This situation could trigger an unprecedented process of internal reckoning and informing on each other among the elite in Tehran. When the pie shrinks, the wolves start eating each other. This is exactly what is happening in Tehran right now. The most destructive impact of this process is seen on the Revolutionary Guard Corps, or Pasdaran, considered the backbone of the regime. Pasdaran is not just a military force, it is also a massive industrial holding company that controls approximately 60% of the Iranian economy. This commercial empire, which ranges from the construction giant Hatemul Enbiar to telecommunications, port operations, and oil smuggling, has gone bankrupt amid diplomatic isolation and a wave of internal strikes. The evaporation of the Pasdaran's commercial revenues has directly disrupted the chain of command in the field. According to intelligence reports leaked from the field, the reality of the ghost battalions within the Pasdaran has come to light. The allegations that the salaries of thousands of soldiers who have existed on paper for years but do not actually exist have been embezzled by high-ranking commanders are truly shocking. Furthermore, in an environment where lower-ranking officers have not been paid for months, the concept of loyalty may have given way to the instinct for survival. For a Pasdaran captain who has not received his salary, there is no longer a rational justification for protecting a regime whose flag has been lowered in London. On the contrary, that captain may now be looking for ways to sell the documents he has collected to the opposition or Western intelligence services in order to avoid prosecution in the event of a possible regime change. The possibility of the security bureaucracy becoming commercialized and criminalized in this way paralyzes the state's defense reflexes. This situation naturally spreads throughout the country. In Tehran right now, no one trusts anyone. Everyone may think their phone is being tapped or that there are bugs in their room. When an intelligence agency begins to spend all its time on internal matters, that is, rival intelligence services, rather than monitoring external enemies, control of the streets is lost. The reports reaching Khamenei's desk do not reflect the reality on the ground. This indicates that every unit in Iran is lying to keep everything under control, either to avoid angering the leader or to cover up their mistakes. This intelligence blindness is the most characteristic symptom of dictatorships in their collapse phase. On the economic front, the situation has moved beyond hyperinflation and has essentially reverted to a barter economy. With the rial completely losing its value and the banking system collapsing, the market has set its own rules. The Grand Bazaar of Tehran does not recognize the exchange rates set by the regime, and a large portion of the shops have closed their shutters. This means that the state has lost its sovereignty to print money and regulate the economy. The bazaar merchants closing their shutters is not just a commercial protest. It also means the activation of a massive solidarity fund that finances protesters and striking workers. The bazaar, which financed the 1979 revolution, has now opened its purse strings in 2026 to dismantle the 1979 regime. Part of the revenue is provided by this shadow financial network established by the bazaar. The regime can control the banks, but it cannot control this traditional hawala and trust network that has existed for centuries. Economic power has shifted from the state to society. So how has this global wave and economic collapse reflected within Iran? The situation on the streets of Tehran has long surpassed a simple bread protest. OSINT data and images from the field show that what is happening in Tehran is not a social explosion, but a full-blown system collapse. There is no water in the capital, there is no money, there is no authority. People have decided they have nothing left to lose in an economy where they have to work for a month to buy 1 gram of gold. When the crowd of 200,000 in Tehran's Punak district is statistically projected to the entire city, it reveals that there are 2.5 to 3.5 million people on the streets of Tehran. By nightfall, this number reached 10 million, as the fear threshold was crossed. This is a critical mass. Beyond this point, no police force, no Revolutionary Guard unit can stop this crowd. The regime's security apparatus was overwhelmed and disintegrated in the face of this ocean of people. In a capital where the sound of air came out of the taps instead of water, where people trampled each other for water tankers, civil disobedience has now turned into a fight for survival. If 100,000 people can gather in the streets of Tehran today, it is because the intelligence apparatus, which should have identified and dispersed the crowd in advance, is preoccupied with its own power struggle. Stability is gone. We cannot even speak of security stemming from the pressure and authority of Kahemeni's regime. In the geopolitical arena, Iran is facing the coldest form of strategic isolation. The Eastern Bloc alliance, in which Kahemeni has invested for years, has evaporated at the moment when the regime needs it most. Acting with pragmatic statecraft, China has chosen to deepen its relations with stable Gulf countries rather than an Iran grappling with internal turmoil and unable to guarantee energy supplies. For Beijing, Iran is no longer a key link in the Belt and Road project, but a risk zone exporting instability. Similarly, Russia, grappling with its own existential crisis, is in no position to throw a military or economic lifeline to save the regime in Tehran. Even if the claims that Kahemeni is planning an escape to Moscow are true, this would not be a rescue of the regime, but merely an asylum request by an individual. The Kremlin is not concerned with who is in power in Tehran, but whether Iran can supply weapons to Russia. An Iran with halted production and collapsed logistics is a spent ally for Moscow. The Iranian regime has been abandoned by the international system. At this point, it is necessary to mention the regime's last card, its strategy of creating chaos. Dictatorships, when falling, often follow a strategy of "after me, the deluge." It is the regime's attempt to frighten the people and force the army to intervene by creating controlled chaos. However, Iranian society has a high enough political consciousness not to fall into this trap. The establishment of neighborhood committees and young people keeping night watch to protect shops and homes from looters show that the people are forming their own self-government in the face of statelessness. The people see the difference between chaos and revolution. The anarchy created by the regime is ineffective in the face of the people's organized discipline. This geopolitical vacuum has created an opportunity for Reza Pahlavi and the transitional government to turn a new page with the West. Get ready. What you are seeing in Iran is not a rebellion, it is the liquidation of a state. The regime is now hanging by a thread, and Reza Pahlavi is taking the stage. As the streets of Tehran chanted Shah, Pahlavi's order to capture and defend the city centers transformed passive resistance into active urban warfare. Pahlavi said he was coming back, But the sentence that really caused a bombshell effect was, "I am preparing to return to my homeland." This statement indicates that the final stage of the process is approaching. The crowds in front of the White House and the support of the Trump administration signal that this return will not be a routine flight, but one guaranteed by global powers, perhaps even accompanied by an Air Force escort. In other words, the windows broken in London may actually be the final nail in the coffin of the regime in Tehran. With the UK having long since withdrawn its support for the regime, Germany having erased the legitimacy of the system established by Kahemeni, and the green light from the US, the parentheses of 1979 are closing with a bang. The lights that went out that night heralded a new dawn on the streets of Tehran. There is nowhere left for the mullahs to run. London has closed its doors, Europe has stripped them of their legitimacy, and Khamenei's own people have gathered at the gates of his palace. There is no turning back now. The events unfolding in London will likely go down in history as the day the mullahs left and the lions returned. Ultimately, the regime in Tehran is dying not from a single blow, but from thousands of small cuts, from organ failure spreading to every cell of the system. The flag lowered from the embassy building in London is merely a showcase of this process. The real destruction is happening in the soldier who cannot get his salary and leaves his post, in the desk of the civil servant who does not work without taking bribes, in the cash register of the shopkeeper who closes his shutters, and in the earpieces of the intelligence officers who listen to each other. This is not a state crisis, but the evaporation of a state. The Khamenei regime was a shell over Iranian society, and this shell has now cracked, becoming too small for the dynamic body beneath it. The picture that emerges is not a civil war. It is the most comprehensive revolution in modern history, spreading from the bottom to the top. No matter how cold the barrels of the tanks are, they are not as hot as the anger of the millions facing them. And when those barrels finally face the reality that the hands holding them are also empty, the historical cycle will be complete. As Iran closes the 47-year parenthesis, the world is witnessing the rebirth of an empire's remnant nation from its ashes. To stay updated on new videos and in-depth analyses, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Stay with PPR Global in pursuit of the truth. Thank you for choosing us.